Welcome to the OverChurched podcast for people who love Christ but are struggling with Christians. I'm excited for today.
Yeah, I'm excited too. It's a good episode because we have Brad here. So thank you so much, Brad, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I want to know, starting off the bat, just having you, let's start off with just telling the audience who you are. Tell us a little bit about your family and then a little bit about your background.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I'm first and foremost a husband, a father, son of God. But my story is filled with lots of instability and uncertainty. So growing up, I was 2 years old and my parents got divorced, which created some instability. Mom got married 6 months later. My first stepfather kind of maybe was a little over religious in my family, ended up sexually abusing my sister. Grew up, my brother had epilepsy. This is my older brother, had grand mal seizures. So I'm a kid, right? Growing up in an environment that is highly chaotic, right? And it's important because I think most people have a story and every story matters.
No.
But that's part of kind of the upbringing. I think I realized later that instability created some cortisol and adrenaline shooting into my system. But as I progressed and grew, some of the things that helped to anchor me as a kid were athletics. I met some friends and started playing sports, baseball specifically, and kind of grew. And that was like the journey. Grew up in church. I would say I did not love church because it was this environment that I grew up in until one day I had this guy start to ask me about my box scores in baseball. And he created a connection with me. And it started to open me up to kind of the experience of what was happening. But I was used to being in an environment where I had coaches, where I put on a uniform and I was trained. And funny enough, that environment actually helped me to understand, discipleship as I moved later. I was voted least likely to be in ministry in high school.
Really?
What kind of
crazy
deal is that?
Yeah, I don't know. When I stepped into ministry, it was legitimately a sense of like something I felt deep. Like there was a mission ahead and I needed to do it. I loved God. I didn't quite get church in the context. I understood sports, but when I said yes to God, I was 17, I graduated from high school, went to Bible school in the middle of a lot of chaos, but that started kind of the journey. And then from there in ministry, it's just been a lot of moments of actually stepping towards things that I felt uncertain or fear.
Yeah.
Right? There's a difference between fear and uncertainty and the spirit of fear, which is that thing that cripples you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it took me all over the world. I went to work for an evangelist. We were drilling water wells, preaching the gospel, saw like over 1 million people come to Christ in third and fourth world countries. And that experience was great.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of incredible things happen. It's also where I learned that I could work for God and not necessarily work with God.
Wow.
So I came back because I thought the mission was we were supposed to advance the kingdom and take this everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So when I would come back, all my friends are in college and I'd go to church and it didn't seem like anybody cared about this thing I was doing. So I grew some resentment and some bitterness, and then God intervened, started giving me a heart for the bride and for the local church. And I ended up going to work for a church that was a rocket ship. We went from 150 people to 4,000 in 15 months.
Wow.
It's where I learned that healthy things grow and so does cancer.
Wow.
And so that experience kind of led and was growing rapidly. And then I felt this sense of call to go plant a church. At the time, there was an organization called the ARC, Association of Related Churches. A few guys had planted with and ended up connecting with them. Felt a stirring in my heart to come to Arizona to plant a church. We did that. Felt like God had given me a word, which was reach the city. Still in the process of understanding all of those dynamics.
Right.
Brought a team of people. Everybody, I told them, because we had come out of this situation that was chaotic from our leadership. And then basically said, hey, we're all going to go work because we've been in this subculture of church for such a long time. I don't know if we know how to actually connect with people.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. And then 10 years we did that. I worked for a company that was a little startup called GoDaddy. I was there for 10 years. There was 30 employees when I started, 4,500 when I left.
Wow.
I watched 35 churches plant in Scottsdale, where I had planted a church, and I watched 35 churches die. So I knew it was tough ground. Church came in that was going to plant. A friend had told me about it. So my wife and I went, we were like, hey, let's be an encouragement to this church that's coming into plant, because we know what it was like for us to just blast through all that we were doing.
Yeah.
And then we felt the stirring in our heart. And at the time I was like, I don't know if anything good can come out of big churches. And I think God was reshaping me and put it on my radar for healthy. And I learned some things in that process, became an executive pastor, stepped away from what I was doing. And then just this past December, after 11 years in that executive pastor role, I stepped off into kind of a new adventure.
Wow.
So it's a lot, I know.
No.
Bruh,
Yeah.
stop.
Hey, you got this down though. You got this
Yeah,
down.
we
That,
gotta
move
that
through it
was
quick.
good. That was good. There were so many things.
Okay, first of all, you said not only do healthy things grow, cancer grows. So we're
Yeah.
gonna have to go back to that.
Yeah.
Then you talked about I worked with God. I worked for God, but not with God. So now we're gonna have to go back to that. And then
Yeah.
I met you. I didn't meet it, man. You went, and you did say, well, just a disclaimer. Brad asked, he was like, "Are we just going in? Like, how deep you want to go?" I was like, "Let's go deep." And then you start off with the first 30 seconds. Yeah, so my stepfather sexually assaulted my sister. I'm like, bro, I didn't mean that. I didn't know. I didn't know.
Yeah.
The reason I love you, Brad, is because I met you almost 8 years ago, because we've been out here 8 years, and it was like that
Yeah.
first year we were at a conference at a Saddleback Church, the Purpose Driven Conference.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Rick Warren's Purpose Driven Conference. Shout out Andy Wood for what he's doing at Saddleback. Bring back Purpose Driven Conference. It was amazing. But we met. I was a youth pastor at the time, and I was just really, I don't know. I just remember us interacting. Like, it was a brief interaction, but it stuck out to me. And then fast forward maybe 3 or 4 years later, I had resigned from my role as youth pastor. I was in the middle of transitioning to a different role, and we re-met at an entrepreneurial
Design pickle.
Design Pickle.
Design pickle.
And
there.
I was like, wait a minute. And as you guys can see, the one of the defining features about Brad is that he looks like a better version of Tony Robbins.
For
And
that.
so I always think about Brad's like my secret Tony Robbins, but
Younger version.
the younger, cooler version Tony Robbins. But I remember when we met, I was like, we talked, and I just loved how you were different from what the prototypical pastor was. Like, the way you were thinking, the fact we were even at like a Design Pickle conference,
Right.
Yeah.
and we were both still on staff at churches. I was like, okay, I like this. And then just through our conversations, I recognized that the way you viewed not just ministry, but just life was a lot different from a lot of the conversations I had with other pastors. That really stuck out to me. And then we stayed in contact. Every time I had a conversation with Brad, I would have to like pull out my phone and just start. Because that's what you do. The same way you just did it. That's every phone call I have with Brad. He's just, and you're just like, wait, say that again. How do I like?
I think you
He's
should
just
do
so good.
voice memos for Brad.
I should just record our
just record
conversations. That'd be
Yeah.
smarter.
Because he tries to tell me in like with so many words of just your amazing conversations that you have or how you've impacted him.
Yeah.
And then he'll try to tell me, I'm like, okay, that's all over the place. Like, he's like this and that. And I'm like, okay.
But it makes sense to when he says it. I mess it up. But here's what I want to get to before we circle back to some of the comments you made that I think are really important. Because you were pastoring and working at GoDaddy.
Mm-hmm.
Those are
It's a demanding job.
yeah.
Right?
And that's on the outside, those are totally different spaces. How did you navigate being a part of a startup, one of the fastest blowing up startups in the country, and that sphere, while also ministry?
Yeah, I think I learned a few things. I think one of it was growing up in a family that literally made an idol out of work ethic. I think I learned some things. It's funny because even in the church and the people I was pastoring, a lot of people would be like, man, I'm so grateful that you don't take any money from the church. They didn't really care about me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They just cared about their opinion.
Yeah.
Because in all honesty, I was a moron.
Mm.
But I was doing it the best that I could. And part of it was like, there's some tenacity and, we do hard things type of thing.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just kept going to the detriment of some areas of my life,
Wow.
my family being one of those, because, part of it is I did not want my identity to come from the church environment.
Yeah.
I knew that it, nickels and noses.
Yeah.
I was trying to keep in the pocket. So
Yeah.
for me, I knew that I could go to work and I could dominate there and I would get my bump for identity, not that that was healthy, but that's the way that I separated the two at that point.
Yeah.
I didn't have anybody coming alongside of me saying, hey, that's too much. In fact, I had the opposite, like, man, keep doing everything. And I just couldn't handle it. But I realized in those moments, and this is what pain will teach you. It's a path to purpose if you have perspective, not if you don't. That basically I was overloading myself. I thought I was Superman. I was just,
you look like him.
Superman, but
Yeah.
but I was finite and I didn't know that. I wasn't developed and trained and being astute at recognizing where I was at and the weight that I was carrying.
Yeah.
Nobody had put that on my dashboard because I just thought you just keep doing and doing and doing and doing. And it took me later and honestly some difficulty within my marriage for me to recognize and understand that, because I would literally go into work sometimes 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I built a system. I'm kind of a systems thinker. I'll say it this way. Someone said we need more philosophers, artists, and mystics in the body of Christ. And I'm a philosopher in the sense that I just like to think. And I believe systems can save you stress, time, energy, and money.
Yeah.
And they have to be they have to be submissive to the heart of the kingdom.
Yeah.
So those can get wonky. But I had built a system and I understood the clients that I was working for and I was getting a return. I mean, I was for a significant period of time. And this is not to sound like it was impressive, but I learned how to work and became, like the top salesperson in the company, to the point that our CFO had a problem because I was making more money than him.
Yeah.
And fortunately I had some good people alongside of me that were like, hey, this thing runs on sales. And so it was a good ride, but I was constantly asking the question in that environment, like, God, what am I doing here? And then my tone changed to like, yeah, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
And I started to pick up more when my tone changed and I started to see some things. It gave me a heart for understanding digital evangelism, digital discipleship, because working with all these clients and, it wasn't so much the accolades. There was something was there, like trusting that God had some wisdom in it, and he did. And still to this day, I see the value of those moments and the ability to actually take not content for consumption, but for conversation, for curiosity, and ultimately to allow people to see it. So that was good, but it was too much. It was too much. And so when you go 2:30 in the morning to 10 at night, and you got to call your wife 45 minutes before you come home, because if things are messy and you have a literal, like, seems like a mental breakdown, I'd have to be like, I'm on my way home, make sure that everything is taken care of. And she's home taking care of the kids. Yeah. It wasn't producing this beautiful life that I had signed up for. So I needed some revelation of that. And I needed to go to work on me, if that makes sense.
So how long did you do that for? And then what was like that breaking point that you decided to leave GoDaddy?
Yeah. Well, it was basically about a 10-year period of time that I did that. And it wasn't until there's still soft things happening in your heart, but part of it was it was really the launch of this other church. I didn't really know who they were. So, obviously in the body of Christ at large, Robert Morris, a lot of people know him. I didn't actually know him. So Robert Morris, Cody Carnes are in a room of like 50 people. And I knew that God was stirring something about being healthy. And so when we were sitting there, it's funny because I met one of their executive pastors, and my conversation was that, we pastor a church. It was actually a year of time. Like I felt like God speak to me about, hey, you're going to bring your church under. But I was like, how do I even do that? And I don't know. I'm skeptical. Yeah. I'm skeptical about big churches. And I think God was honestly changing my thoughts about it. So a year later, I ended up meeting the senior pastor, Preston, at that time. And he and I got together, and he had a word that God had given him about us coming together. And so, again, you approach your fears and go,
Yeah.
Let's see what God's got. And I told him in the beginning, like, he's like, hey, you got to come meet my family. And I was like, all right, but I'm pretty skeptical that anything good can come out of big. And we'll talk about that. Like, I no longer use those as identifiers, big or small.
Yeah.
I think what God's put in my heart is I want to be a part of building something beautiful.
Yeah.
And good. So that could be big, that could be small. It doesn't really matter. Is it beautiful? And there's big and small that aren't.
Yeah.
So that becomes kind of the direction. But we learned a lot. I think there was a lot of things that were restored in our heart towards really the bride, and more has come over the last little while. I think you're going to hear me say this where you can push back on it. What we have called the church, I would probably say, is a celebration of the church, because Jesus said that the church is the body of Christ.
Yeah.
You know? And that's a fundamental shift in the way that I was raised. You know, I was basically like, as many of us are, like, go to the church planner conference. We need more churches. And I agree with that. I wish that somebody would have actually taught me how to build and train disciples first, and then let him build his church. If that makes sense.
No, that makes sense, because that goes into one of our questions. Yeah.
So, gosh,
so much.
First of all, you've been instrumental in my life in terms of prioritizing health. Like, every time we meet, you never ask me, how's the church? Like you, that comes up later, but it's never like, how's the church doing? How many people are coming? Like, we never really go there. You're always challenging me in terms of, are you prioritizing a meal with your family? Are you like, how is your soul? Like, so you're so much on the health, like healthy. I have a question for you. With all the experience that you've seen in the church, or all the time you spent in church, and all the experiences you've had at multiple size churches, from some of the largest to church plants, whatever, what percentage of churches would you, if you had to guess or estimate, what percentage of churches are actually healthy?
Such a loaded question. It's lower than I thought. And the part of it is because there's humans.
Yeah.
And we're kind of in this time where I see us moving towards, I'll call it over therapizing. I believe in therapy. I believe in coaching, but it's almost becoming so much so, right? Like,
I'm with that.
I think our stories matter.
Yeah.
But he is the author.
Yeah.
So, like, his story matters, but there has to be some reconciliation. I think even, we look at the life of Peter. I mean, Peter had to deal with his past. He denied Christ before he was able to step into his future. And if he didn't, when Jesus encounters him and is like, do you love me? Do you love me? Right. He's approaching the reality of the pain. Because if he never dealt with it, there would be guilt, there'd be self-doubt that lies in all of us. Yeah. So I think, percentage on whether or not we're headed towards beauty really depends on whether or not those that are leading and in all capacities are actually attentive, or they're asleep. Are they awake? Are they aware? And then are they activating any things? Like, right, I can tell you my story. The reason why I can tell it so fast is because I have metabolized it. I've worked through it.
Yeah.
And what happens is those big splinters that get lodged into our heart, the impact of them don't go away, but we pull out the slivers, but they're still there. So now the story has some depth, because God has taken whatever is trash and he's made it treasure. And there's beauty in the story. I think when we think about compassion for people, I think one of the things that gets missed in churches, and I think there's markers that we can put on the dashboard to help us, is like, do you still see their story? Why did Chick-fil-A have to create the most incredible video? Every person has a story as people are walking into a chicken sandwich shop.
Yeah.
But then there's a call out, like, this person is, working their way through college. This person just deployed their son to Afghanistan. This person just lost their mother of 95 years, right? That gets missed.
Yeah.
I think we miss the one, and that's what the rub is. As things grow, and they should, healthy things grow.
Yeah.
But when we miss the purpose and the heartbeat of God. So I think, the last several years have been for me a deep dive study really on the character and nature of God. As God reveals himself, Yahweh means self-revealing one. And then our Bibles aren't written in chronological order.
Yeah.
But if you were to look at like how God reveals himself chronologically throughout scripture, there's a secret there's some treasure there because he's a creator and creativity is huge. Then everything he creates is good. And then there's kindness and compassion and care. And eventually we get to he's slow to anger, but like in the order of things. So I think about that in terms of meeting people too. Like, what do we learn first? Those foundational pieces become instrumental into the relationship that we build. And our people need that. And so do our churches. So many church staffs are running on empty because they're doing the work. And that's important, but they're missing out on actually receiving. I remember the first time I stepped into our church staff, I said, hey, one of the first things to go for people working in a church is their actual relational depth with God. So we're going to spend the first 30 minutes developing that. And then that begs questions of like, who taught you how to pray?
Yeah.
Who taught you how to have a relationship with God? And then those answers are all across the board. Like, so we had to go back to like, all right, well, for some of you on our staff, like, did you know you could pray the prayers of Nehemiah, Paul, Jesus, right? Like, let's start there so that we have a framework, and we want to make sure that we're prioritizing relationship with God, then identity, then being, and then behavior. It's this complicated thing. If you reverse the order of those, it becomes legalism. If my behavior, then being, then identity, then relationship. I know I'm throwing out a lot, but my point is, when it comes to churches, I think it's across the board, but it really is about the culture that we're establishing, and then basically prioritizing the things that are right and making sure that they are the heartbeat of God. And then our hearts are transforming in this process. We got to be honest though, because it's, the stage is a drug.
Yeah.
Many have said that. Many have said that. Yeah.
Wow.
I know, honestly, I had never heard it till you told me that.
Really?
I had never heard that quote. I believe it.
Yeah.
But like, that's what's crazy to me is like, this is my perspective. I don't think enough churches even have a goal of health. I think the goal, and I hope I didn't say most. I said not enough, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think enough churches prioritize health over more, more people, more revenue, so we can do more things for the kingdom or for us. So it doesn't matter. But you're one of the very few that I've talked to one-on-one that every conversation eventually centers back towards what's actually healthy, what's actually, for your soul, like for how you're leading your family, then how you lead the church, and then all those things. And it made me like, even when you said that one time, you're like, you have to be honest with yourself. Like the pulpit is a drug, and whether or not, it's just the preaching as much as feeling like we talked about, like that identity of, oh, I'm winning in this, like it's growing. So I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
And I'll say it. I don't think enough pastors that I know or that I've seen have people like this in their life that are challenging them on health. And I don't think it's pushed enough as a focal point. Every pastor, every leader is going to say the right thing of, hey, you got to prioritize your family. You got to make sure that's your first ministry. Everyone says that, but it's every conference I go to, the majority of the conference is built on how to grow more, how to reach more, how to do more. And I feel like it's a false narrative of health when the real narrative is growth.
Well, if you think about ministry in this context, which I've watched, I think a lot of times, it's a story of the victim and the villain, right? The victim basically gets hurt in life, and then he becomes a villain, or I should say the villain and the hero. The villain is like, I got hurt. I'm going to hurt others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The hero is like, I got hurt. I'm going to make sure nobody else gets hurt. I think we get into ministry because of that. We're all broken. But in ministry, I see a ton of brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I watched and observed was early on, I was like, man, everybody, it's like this Hollywood Christianity thing for importance and affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't grow up thinking it would be cool to be applauded for being in ministry on
Mhm.
and standing
Right.
on a stage and sharing the good news.
Mhm.
I thought it'd be cool to be a baseball player
Same.
in
Or
the
basketball.
outfield.
Yeah, yeah,
hit
yeah.
home runs. Okay, so that doesn't make me better. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that was it. So
Yeah.
when I got around a lot of people who thought it was super cool,
Yeah.
like to this day, like I've been in some green rooms with
Yeah.
the heavy hitters,
Yeah.
I don't like to ask them, like, I don't sit there with like, eyes of like, oh, I always like to ask a question. And some people, giving me grief for this, but I just be like, so what do you do for fun? It actually is a point of connection. And what's happened when I do that, like they feel like they're a human being.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you fly fish, you
Yeah.
play basketball. What do you do for
Yeah.
fun?
Yeah.
Because I want to come down and meet the human.
Yeah.
What we
Yeah.
don't get in our leadership roles and all of this is we rarely get this at the end of a service that somebody's like, hey, how are you?
Yeah.
And the reason why is because they've made us human doing, performance oriented, because they're taking from us. It's a really scary part in ministry, because basically all of a sudden you lose sight of the fact that you're a human.
Yeah.
And you're executing and you're
Mhm.
spitting out wisdom and you're a storyteller and it's
Yeah.
awesome. But all of a sudden there's a separation from being an actual human
Yeah.
who brushes their teeth and puts on their pants like everybody
Right.
else.
Picks up
And
dog poop.
it's just a tough thing. Yeah,
Picks
that's
up
exactly
dog
right.
poop.
Yeah.
But no, that's so true, because I think I started seeing Justin, especially when we started off in planning the church and everything. I remember I don't know what point it was at when we first started, but I had to look at him. And I don't know if you remember this. It was like, I was like, hey, you don't have to be all these things. Like, because it's so crazy how I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast, they're overchurched. They're hurt by a pastor, a leader,
Yeah.
or themselves. They were that and they've walked away. And so because of that, I think that a lot of the time with this tension that we're feeling as lead pastors right now is that we are trying to figure out how to allow the humanness of us still be seen.
Mhm.
And also with the fact of, but we're still trying to lead spiritually these people, somewhere. And I remember looking at him, like he was feeling like this weight. I could just see that it was like all these things that if without him saying it, of just, you've never been here. You don't know how to do X, Y, and Z because you've never had to before. And sometimes I think that what has happened, the unhealthy thing is, and the intention is that people look at us as pastors of like, we're supposed to be the counselor. We're supposed to be the business person, like the financial advisor, like all things to all people, when only Jesus is that.
Well, I think interesting. I had a guy tell me this, an author. He's like, Brad, I think there's something that is an issue is like, who is the head of the church? And if I ask you, who's the head of the church? Jesus. It's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be.
And so the head in the human body basically has all the intelligence. And even in the human body, if we study biology, it actually sends messages to the nervous system. But in the churches at large, Jesus has said he's the head, but it's actually the senior leaders that are the head. And so what comes with that is the title of chief sermonizer, chief theologian, chief fundraiser, chief. Okay. So what happens in the human body is it actually puts weight on what's called the atlas vertebrae and the axis vertebrae.
Yeah.
And it gets out of alignment.
True story. I found that out yesterday. Nice. I went to the Stretch Lab. Shout out the Stretch Lab. If you want to sponsor this podcast,
that's great.
We'll take it. But that's literally what my therapist was saying. She was like, well, you're under a lot of stress. I feel it. Like literally she could feel it. And she did this thing and I could literally, it was built up on one side, right in and it was all stress.
So when the body's out of alignment, what this chiropractor was saying about it is that when it comes back into alignment, deaf ears have popped open, all kinds of maladies. So I think that we just have to own the fact that we're carrying weight. Anybody in a position of leadership is dealing with the fact that I've got to be everything and I have to know all the answers. So I can't appear to anybody else that I'm weak. Then you start to open up once you start recognizing, I think first and foremost, like I'm needy. I'm a Ferrari.
Yeah.
But Ferraris are high performance and high maintenance, right? It's $800 for an oil change. Okay. And if that Ferrari doesn't have the fuel that it needs, it's just a paper mache with 740 horsepower under the hood.
Wow.
That is helpful, right? I'm finite.
Yeah.
Okay? God's infinite, but the point is get what you need. But then that doesn't mean that anybody and everybody, we need safe people. That's what's hardest.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I went on an exploration of opening my life up to others. And what I found is like, yes, I appreciate, even with my own children, like I appreciate being their father. I'm honored to walk that path, but I've had to train them to teach me or to teach them I'm a human.
Yeah.
And dad actually has weight and struggle. That's helping them to be more resilient and more compassionate. So I had to train them to do that. I think we have to train our congregations.
Yeah.
And then we have to be insightful that people are taking from us. They don't mean to.
Yeah.
It's, 1 Samuel 8, give us a king. So we've got to figure out how to not be placed in that position. It's called idolatry.
Yeah.
Just intimacy with an image. But the ecosystem can lend itself. This is why I believe we need stages and tables.
Yeah.
So let me throw this out there, right? COVID just happened not that long ago. Did we learn anything? Did we learn anything? Like in church history, 586 BC, the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed and the rabbis had the wherewithal to say, hey, okay, we got nowhere to have church, let's say. The home is higher than the synagogue. Your table is an altar, teach your children a Torah and a trade. And for whatever reason, when I read that story, I'm like, dang. And then you look at how Judaism survived through everything, Holocaust. I was wondering, could the church make it if all the buildings went away? Okay. So that started to reframe. Like, do I believe in having churches on every corner? Absolutely. It's proven that it increases the value of a community. Yeah. But let's not limit that to the church.
Yes.
Let's actually expand it. And I was with the church. I'll say this real quick and then you guys can riff off of this. They are tens of thousands of people. We were talking about small group ministry and they were like, man, you guys have small group ministry. We do, but we shut it down. Why'd you shut it down? It was growing rapidly. People were like, the priesthood of the believers was growing at such a pace, but it was moving in neighborhoods and people were baptizing people in their pools. And oh my God, but they weren't coming to church on Sunday. So we shut it down. And I was like, I see the complexity. Wow. Those are the hard conversations to have. And it's not to say, I don't know the answer specifically.
Right.
It just sounded kind of like they were doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it was happening.
Yeah.
And then it was like, so there's a tension that's there. It's not right or wrong. It's just a tension.
I don't want to tell your story for you. And I know we have to wrap this up. So I'm going to make a broad overview and then I have a question for you. And correct me if I say anything that's not accurate. So when we talked, one of the reasons that you've told me that you stepped down is because you just really wanted to focus on discipleship as opposed to just the organizational structure of the church, which you didn't demonize anything. You were just saying, I just feel so passionate about discipleship. Am I accurate with that part so far?
Yep.
Okay.
I will say I didn't step down. I stepped out.
Stepped out.
There you go. Okay. One thing that, a lot of this comes from our conversations and things that we've talked about, is the thing that scares me about even our church is, so technically a mega church, if you Google it, it says any church over 2,000 people, 2,000 people a week. Okay. What scares me is I don't know if we can disciple effectively at the rate at which we're growing. I'm scared that our growth as a church will outpace our ability to actually disciple the people that are growing, that are coming. Do you believe that? How do you think I want to get a quick, not a quick answer, but I want to get a clear answer for this. Here's how I'll answer it. I'll ask it. Do you think that the overall, not demonizing or putting everybody in a category, but just generally speaking, from what we've seen or from what you've seen, do you think that mega churches effectively disciple? Do you feel like we're managing that tension well? Some
do, some don't. Let's give you a quick, kind of kingdom principle, right? Yeah. Everything starts as a mustard seed. Starts small, doesn't stay small, but it does start small. If you took 2 people in your church and those 2 people discipled 2 people and that kept growing every year. So then those 2 people and everybody, that was the focus. 20 years, it's 1 million people.
Wow.
I think that what's happening though, like these churches that are 30, 40,000, they kind of get lost and really go back to the simplicity of it. Follow me as I follow Christ. That can happen. Coaching, that can happen. Right now, I'm in an environment bringing guys into a workout, right? But the whole goal is to get those guys to then take 2 other guys. That's how this thing becomes a movement.
Yeah.
I think what we've got is kind of a acquiescing to a performance, and we've got some really great celebrities and not enough servants.
Yeah.
Eugene Peterson, right, wrote The Message, all that. He said, I didn't say, he said that he doesn't think you can shepherd effectively over 500. He said, I'll make the instance at some point. And I've met some huge churches, I'll call them giga churches, that there is some effectiveness, but there's a lot of emphasis on understanding this and working through it, and then coming up with solutions that will help them to know their people better. So engagement is the catchword right now, and nobody's figured it out. I happen to work for a company that actually helps as a step, but I think we can. I think there just has to be an emphasis towards what I just said.
Yeah.
Find 2 people. Here's the deal. It gets harder to disciple 2. So how do you disciple people? Take them with you.
Yeah.
Grow them. Take a year. But if we could just get back to that simplicity, I actually think, so then we should ask that question. Who are you discipling? With our church staff, who are you discipling? Who are the 2? And then that word has gotten a little churchy.
Yeah.
Train. Who are you training? And do you have anything that they could follow? I bring a lot of guys into my home, and I'll try to do this. I bring them into my home to show them how to actually have a relationship with God by starting with, because it's hard for men to actually receive love because of culture and society and the last 100 years. But so I'll take them in and show them how I did that. Because I grew up hearing true spirituality is love God and love people. Nothing wrong. It's incomplete. We love him because he first loved us. So I literally have to bring him in the same way. Bring them in to show them how you pray. Not that you've got it all perfect, but show them.
Yeah.
That's how you train somebody. I understand that from coaching. Being coached, I got insight from the outside.
Yeah.
But you can't disciple 40 people. So what we're doing on the weekend, let's just understand what it is, and then let's release for others to do it. And that gets scary because we like to command and control, and that has to be thought through in our cultures.
Wow. I love that. I love the encouragement to just, I think this episode is just overall, people will walk away, and I pray that they'll walk away listening to this of just their eyes open, their hearts open, and to just seeing a different perspective. And sometimes I think that they just don't know what they don't know. And then some other times I believe it's, if you've been in church so long, it's really hard to come out of that. And when you're out of that, well, for us, when we stepped out of full-time ministry to be at a secular job and stuff, I think it was helpful to come back in.
Absolutely.
To how I've learned more starting a church, I've been untraining more than I'm training.
You're unlearning a lot.
I'm unlearning a lot.
Right.
I'm unlearning so much. And I love having people around us that are necessarily have not been in ministry, but been in the secular world, because they ask a lot of questions and they
think differently.
And I love that they question everything. It's like, why do we do that though? Like, why do we have to do that? And I've just never asked myself that sometimes, like, why do we do that? Why do I have a women's conference like this all the time? Like, why? Like, and why do we do it that way? Like, it doesn't have to be that way. Who told me it has to be that way?
And what's the outcome that we want to produce has to be looked at. Someone said, basically managing people is like coaching a 5-year-old t-ball team. You basically taught them, and then basically once the game starts, someone takes their glove off, picks up a dandelion and starts blowing it. And that's why we have to keep coming back down to mission, vision, values, but not at an obsessive rate.
Right.
I think one of the greatest impacts that I've ever had, and I'll tell you where this led real quick. Basically, I started coaching my son's baseball team, and I did it for 2 years. I ended up coaching and spending time with the kids. And one of the kids' moms, they were going through a divorce or whatever. Then she was getting remarried. Well, because of the relationship, she ended up knowing that I was pastor, asked if I would do the wedding. Well, I didn't know this, but basically her fiance was basically the CEO of Loophole Optics out in Washington. And so I get invited to this wedding, and I'm sitting with 150 people, every single firearms manufacturer like on the planet. And I was like, all because I just coached.
Wow.
Right. And I ended up having to step out of coaching because I was being over obsessive. And I was watching my sons look at me like trying to please dad. My point though is, coach, get involved. Like you said, humans are the most beautiful, intricate, and just eject from everything that was churched. Like,
yeah.
right. Stop it doesn't work. If somebody's dealing with porn affairs,
Yeah.
adultery, drugs, alcohol, there's a reason.
Yeah.
Ask them what's going on. Like, be interested. Don't like, I think Jesus was interested. He asked
more questions.
Questions.
like, what are you longing for? What are you looking for? Do you want to get well? I think
Yeah.
we'd empower people evangelistically if we got them to actually be interested in other human beings
Right.
and stop being so excited about just these events. Like, the upper room happened once,
Yeah.
not every weekend. So I think sometimes we want to create the upper room experience.
Every Sunday is going to be the best Sunday ever.
Yes. It's there's nothing, it's okay. But like,
Yeah.
I think sometimes
It's okay to have a July
that's
in
right.
Arizona.
That's
You're
right.
like, man, this Sunday
Yeah,
sucks,
so-
but we're going to get Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so
Thanks
much,
for
Brad.
coming.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Real
guys.
quick, let everybody know, how can they stay connected? How can they,
How can we
how
be
can they, I
supportive
mean,
to you?
I get connected with Brad, but
Yeah.
how can all these other people that are missing out?
Soon to come, unleashgreatness.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's where you can go.
Okay.
Awesome.
Also,
Awesome.
if you enjoyed this, Brad will be preaching at, am I allowed to say this? It's too late. I already said it.
Yeah.
Brad's preaching at Legacy soon.
Yeah.
So
excited.
I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Thanks for being instrumental in our lives. Thanks
Yeah.
for
Thank you.
being that safe place. You mentioned it real quick. We didn't have time to touch on it, but thanks for being that safe space for me to just be raw and vulnerable about what I'm struggling with and just being able to redirect me and let me feel human. I love you. I appreciate you.
Thank you guys. Thanks
Yeah.
for having open hearts and open ears and for leading like you're doing. But take care of you. Love each other well. Care for your souls.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks.
Appreciate that. Till next time. Appreciate you guys. Love you. Remember to love, live, and lead like Jesus.
Do it.